Hi, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Louise Hall and I'll be helping to manage the webinar platform. So aside from some logistical information, you won't hear much from me. I'm handing over shortly to Sandra Kerr, OBE, Race Equality Director, and Pumi Samaravera, Head of Membership. They'll have much more interesting information to impart than I do. Sandra and Pumi are going to take you through a presentation exploring bullying and harassment, which, as you know, emerged as a key theme from the Race at Work survey. The presentation will last around 30 minutes or so. We'll be circulating a copy of the presentation after today's session, so don't worry too much about having to scribble every little thing down. We'll be picking up questions at the end, so you can put questions to us by using the question function on the GoTo platform. Please feel free to type questions in at any point throughout the presentation, and when we get to the end, we'll try and pick up as many of those as possible. Also, if you seem to be having any technical problems viewing the slides, etc., then please use the question function to alert us to that also, and we'll see if there's anything that we can do to help with that. So, over to Sandra.
Well, welcome everyone, and to today's short webinar, which Pumi and I are going to be hosting. And as Louise has already said, we are going to be focusing on the bullying harassment segments of the Race at Work survey. So we're really pleased and that our sponsor employers, BT, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, KPMG, and Nationwide helped us by supporting this survey production. And I'm actually really pleased that we've had a successful and an ongoing great collaboration with YouGov and Manchester University. We're also pleased of the coverage that we had around the regions, great responses, and we've cut some of the data in this survey by region and by sector, which we're going to look at in a moment, but most of the data slides are based on the YouGov sample survey. So, key findings from the report. Bullying harassment in the workplace is prevalent, and what was really interesting is 30% of the employees who have observed it had observed it in the last 12 months. And also, there were 2,350, we're going to be precise here, comments on these, and we'll tell you about what we're going to do with these going forward.
Right, so for your information, and so we can be crystal clear, what we've done is over the next two slides, this one and the next one, we've included the questions that we asked around bullying and harassment, and you can see we've specifically asked around racist harassment and bullying. So just give you a couple of seconds to take this in, this slide, and then I'll move on to the next one. So we asked about both someone's experience of, as well as instances when they've witnessed bullying and harassment.
And you may find one of the things I want to talk about with this slide is I think it's really important to look at age and ethnicity when you're looking at the results. I think when we talk about multi-generational workforces, we need to look at this. As we look at the results going forward, thinking about the age profile of the participants, and also remembering the McKinsey research that shows that in organizations with more racially diverse teams have higher, greater financial returns, and this demonstrates that this is business and policy making, and getting this right is really important. So, key things I want to just pick up on this slide. So, aspiration, frustration. We found, focusing on BAME respondents about bullying and harassment. And when we did the survey this year, Race at Work, we see the same trend. And also, actually, a recent ACAS report, which talks about bullying harassment comments across the workplace diversity strands. So I don't think it's just something about race. So this slide the key thing, if you look at the first column, you'll see that it's not just ethnic minority people observing and witnessing or experiencing. It's actually, if you look at the white group, you see that there are the same similar results, particularly when we ask about who has seen this in the last 12 months.
That's really, in many ways, that reinforces it, isn't it? The fact that it's not just one particular ethnic group that's reporting it. It's sort of reassuring as well in some ways, in an oddly negative way.
So this slide, one of the things, the big reporting bits that came out of the report was people not being comfortable talking about race. And why is this important? I think it's maybe somehow connected, subtle, unreported instances. Why is it important? Because, you know, the future is increasing diversity. This challenge isn't going away. And dialogue is really important because we need to talk so we can come to solutions.
I think it's really interesting, actually, Sandra. There's this notion out there that, you know, Black and Asian minority ethnic people are more comfortable talking about race, and I think we need to challenge that. You know, we talk often in the gender campaign and in general about how women really aren't one homogeneous group, and this is, if at all, even more so true when it comes to ethnic minorities. So I think we could all, regardless of being white or BME, benefit from some support on the topic because it's such a complex and nuanced area.
I agree, and I think people should be using this data, using the results to stimulate conversations inside your organization. It's legitimate. We've provided you materials that you can say, we want to test this. This is what their report says. Is it the same here? This slide we've included just to really emphasize that you kind of may have heard in the media talking about devolved regional government becoming more and more prevalent and common practice, I think, for the UK. But it shows that no matter what region you look at, that pyramid you hear me talk about, 4, 8, 16, it exists in each region. So therefore, just really reinforcing that we need to be able to talk about this. And I just want to flag up our original infographic on this that highlighted that 18 to 24-year-olds were highlighted as the most racially biased group of all age groups. And that was data crunched by Manchester University looking at US, UK, and 17 European nations. So just with that lens on, it just spotlights that there is a need for employers to take action. And I'd say one quick way to start is ensuring that all your induction materials, the values of you as an employer, what you espouse, is reinforced, and the same thing would be for promotion, promotion, management, training, just really reinforcing the values of you as an organization. Okay, so we asked you, Gov, to do some additional analysis for this webinar, specifically, actually, and I want to share with you, this is the only regional breakdown slide that we've added to this presentation, but more will be coming out later in the month. But we wanted to just kind of ask the question by region, by location, what is people's experience of bullying harassment? And I think for those of you who have branch networks, your headquarters outside of the London, it's useful context to potentially crunch your data, your engagement surveys by region, and not take a one-size-fits-all approach. So really interesting there. So this was an interesting slide. If you look at it carefully, you'll see that the public sector coming out at the top as far as more likely to report bullying harassment from managers, second coming in the voluntary sector, and the third the private sector.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in terms of a league table, this is sort of the, I would say, my sort of maybe not unconscious, conscious bias is I've generally actually assumed that this would be almost the inverse, that the private sector would actually lead this, not the best league table to lead, but that was my perception. And it's really interesting in comparison to Project 2840, for those of us who are familiar with the gender campaign research that was done some time ago, the voluntary sector came out, not so not so well in that as well. And at that time, we chalked it down to the third sector not having a very clear policy framework, maybe a little bit unstructured. But then, if you see that the public sector seems to be, struggling in this regard, and we know that the public sector, has generally very clear policies and processes. I guess it just reinforces that that's not enough. What do you think, Sandra? You were a civil servant. You must have some insight.
Thanks for that question, Phoebe. I laughed when I saw this question. I thought, great. Actually doing a bit of thinking about this and talking about this, I think there is a big thing in the public sector. There is research that we've seen, and I read the ACAS report, which I mentioned, talking about when there is pressure and challenges in an organization, there's higher incidences of bullying harassment. And we know that the government has been under austerity measures for a long time. The future looks like more austerity. So that means doing more for less. And actually, I think it probably gives us some insight into the voluntary sector. Many of you will be familiar with headlines a few years ago saying, donations contracting, we live under that thing of, oh, money's coming in, no, it's not, etc. So I think there's something here around when tough times hit, a real need to be a bit more sensitive around these issues. But, obviously more research would be benefited here. Really interesting here is that when we look at the same question about how do, people's experience or witnessing, racist harassment from colleagues, we see the same trend, so public, third and private. But also I think the reason why this is so important, this slide around colleagues, is because it's linked to inclusive, it's cultures, it's linked to workplace cultures. And I think further investigation is absolutely needed here. And then we also ask the question about clients and customers, and I would say again you see the same trend, although this time the public and the third sector kind of coming out at the same. And again, in here, if you look at it quite closely, you'll see the private and public sector, when you get a chance to look over the three slides, they're more likely to report bullying and harassment with teams and clients than from their managers. So it's less likely to be the manager, more likely to be the teams and the stakeholders. And then with the voluntary sector, it's more likely to be with the clients than actually the teams and colleagues. So again, nuances, I think, in this whole area that need further review.
Before we move on to the next slide, actually, we're going to try and get this a little bit more interactive and launch a poll. Sandra's already talked about our racial bias infographic that's on the website. So I am dead certain all of you have gone and digested that information, and this is all at your fingertips. So the question, and you should be seeing this on the screen as well now, out of the following three industries, which has the lowest racial bias in the UK? So the three sectors that we've picked are finance, STEM, and the legal sector. Okay, so while you mull that over and send your results through, next slide.
Okay, so we broke down the sectors a bit more in detail around managers, and interestingly, you'll see transport and distribution is, the furthest out there, but health and medical not far behind, as even education, some surprising ones like education are not far behind. And when you look at education and national health, you do wonder, is that kind of potentially some of the spike in the public sector results that we've just observed? And then again, I think it just reinforces, this slide just reinforces the team, the colleagues. As you can see, overall, most sectors showing actually that colleagues are more likely to be demonstrating behaviors linked to bullying harassment than managers. And, this kind of deeper analysis makes me really pleased that we've introduced the Workplace Cultures Award on the RAISE campaign for 2016, because we really want to promote good practice in employers that are going against these trends. But it does kind of start flagging up what's the role of banter, what kind of behaviors are going under the radar that managers don't even see, and the more subtle and nuanced non-verbal, behaviors that perhaps we may have captured, may not have captured in the comments. And then we also, this slide around customers and clients, as you can see, I mean, hospitality coming out way out there, and also medical, health again, really leading the way as far as interaction with customers and clients. So maybe some people not surprised about this, but interesting for us to analyze going forward.
Absolutely, it's food for thought and I guess further investigation. Okay, so our poll results. Now the question was, out of the following three industries, which has the lowest racial bias? And the poll results, based on what you said to us, you think that finance has the lowest, and actually that is a tie with the STEM sector, and that the legal sector has, within those three, the highest racial bias. Surprisingly, and I say surprisingly because I was under the same impression, it's actually the other way around. The legal sector has the lowest racial bias, and finance and STEM are tied, oddly enough. So please do go and take a look at the infographic online, but in some ways, not great news, is that the difference between the sectors isn't massively high, and there is a fair amount of racial bias across the piece. So in some senses, there are no real winners here. But yeah, it's an interesting infographic and tool to play with and get a little bit more nuance, especially if you have international, regional, EMEA, US-based offices as well.
So you've heard me mention further investigation, further research. So that's why we're absolutely delighted. Our collaboration with Manchester University and their network, which is a centre on dynamics of ethnicity, are actually going to do a deep dive into those 2,350 responses. And I said, yes, all of them. Thank goodness someone else is going to read them. I have to say, I started to read them, and some of them are really horrible stuff, some quite shocking stuff. A lot of, I prefer not to say, but still a lot of comments to get through. And what we're hoping is for them to add some texture, more insight into the data and the results by sector.
Great, and this is really, in some ways, an opportunity for you as well to start thinking about sort of questions that you would like to ask. I'll let Sandra sort of dip into this slide as well before I give you a little bit more information.
Yes, so one of the things we're hoping for is actually to maybe provide additional advice and information for employers around key working relationships, policies, activities and themes. There may be trends in there within comments, certain kind of incidences or areas in the workplace that tend to maybe spike this type of challenge and behavior. Will it produce additional insights for employers? I can only say at this stage, I hope so. And they will be reviewing all the body of research that they know, and we're delighted that we've got, a professor and, PhD actually really spending, it's going to be a 2-month project working on looking at these details. And also, we'll probably, throw in the 3,000 leadership ones. Well, actually, can I just say something about the leadership comments on the webinar? Of that more than 3,000, there were only five, not 5,000, less than 5 that YouGov could find where it explicitly referenced that the champion was kind of stamping out or standing against bullying harassment. So I think some really interesting insights there too.
So what we're offering you right now is a chance to just think between now and the end of the webinar, but also, definitely after we finish everything up, you can send us your thoughts via email. You have an opportunity, I guess, now to influence the further investigation. We have some thoughts. We've consulted our champion members at a recent champion forum, But, if there's any other particular aspects of bullying and harassment in the workplace that you'd really like us to get Manchester University to explore, have a think and send us that information, as we go now or later. We can come back to that question at the end. And I think the important thing is that it's very difficult to isolate, aspects around bullying and harassment, and sometimes the nuanced bits are so important. So it's good for us to get ideas from membership about what specific aspects you'd like us to investigate further.
And then this slide is just simply highlighting a couple of the recommendations, and now you've seen additional context. That's why they're in the report. We really feel that there is a need for leadership in this area and for it to be at the top table. And I think sometimes when you can do the cost line related to what happens when this is going on in the workplace, it can be a real eye-opener for the board.
One of the things, in terms of recommendation 10 that's on the slide about executive team and board members taking personal commitment, our 2014 benchmark data actually showed, Sandra, that nearly every organization out there has a policy on bullying and harassment. And actually a lot of those organizations who benchmarked said they have methods for colleagues to confidentially report bullying and harassment as well. And a lot of organizations talking about zero tolerance policies, but clearly that doesn't translate into the lived experience. And the real importance of, as you said, out of the 3,000 odd comments around leadership, only 5 people saying that someone actually stood up and said and did something. So what's crystallized for me is that you need leadership specifically on this agenda, cross-cutting perhaps, not just sort of racial bullying and harassment, but bullying and harassment as a real workplace culture issue. My 2 cents worth.
Okay, so what we've put coming up here now, we've put together kind of 2 slides based on things that, I think it's a fundamental employer checklist. So it would be interesting for you to kind of mentally go through these bullet points and think, do you have these things in place? Because I think there's potentially some learning there for us as you as employers to ensure at least this list exists.
Absolutely, and I just want to keep beating my drum, I guess, about having a leadership position on this. Second to the last bullet is about appointing a bullying and harassment czar, and really that language is from the ACAS 2015 workplace report, and this was in the health sector in particular, is the case study that's reported in there. The importance of having someone leading on this area and really setting up maybe a working group around it. So the fact of having a race diversity champion or a diversity champion at large in an organization isn't enough, and actually making sure that it's, someone's remit and scope is really around tackling bullying and harassment. I think that's the important point here. Right, next slide.
And I suppose what bit I'd emphasize on this slide is the last point about really kind of trying to seek to get clarity about what is bullying and harassment and what is not. I think the framework in which managers can operate can only be helpful, but actually based on the insight that we've seen, there needs to be a framework for teams as well, because there seems to be high levels of issues and behaviors that individuals are perceiving as bullying and harassment there.
So before we finish off, we'll definitely invite some questions, but I just wanted to draw your attention to just a handful of resources that would point you in the direction of. The ACAS Workplace Trends report we've already mentioned, and within that there's some references to some other bullying and harassment specific ACAS working papers. Our 2014 benchmark survey trends analysis, we had some insight around bullying and harassment across both gender and race, with some specific gender-specific and race-specific data in there that I think is quite useful. One of the things that we found in the past, Sandra, we talked about this, as we said, in terms of aspiration, frustration, and some of the other reports that we've done in the past, that bullying and harassment seems to come head on head with performance management, and where does one line end and the other begin? And it's a gray area, and it's an interesting notion I think a lot of people don't sort of wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to bully the hell out of my team today. You know, that's not how this transpires. There's pressure, as we talked about before, in terms of whether it be austerity or just genuine workplace pressure, and particularly managers not being aware, or maybe that's an excuse, but not being particularly conscious of the impact that they're having on people. So actually looking at this in a proactive way and supporting line managers to actually do their job on the front foot, and, you know, help manage people who might be slightly different to them, because we know that most managers are white, and we're talking about ethnic minorities feeling sort of strained and perhaps left out. So our RACE campaign has a performance mentoring toolkit that might be useful, as well as our mentoring toolkits out there that can take a different angle and in sort of a proactive measure approach. And last but not least, Project 2840 also has some interesting data around the dual strand, sort of the intersectional piece, where, you know, 52% of the females said they'd experienced some form of bullying and harassment in the 3 years prior to the survey, but actually if you were a disabled woman, that was 71%. If you were African Caribbean, it was 69%. So some interesting stats. And I know that the Gender Campaign is also working on a toolkit, so, you know, we can look at this in the round going forward, I'm sure.
Thank you, Pumi. And also one of the things, obviously, with, so this is kind of the end of the formal kind of slide presentation, but I wanted to bring back to that question about Manchester University. If anybody had any kind of comments that they wanted to ask us to ensure that we're looking at, and ask them to look at as kind of nuances and points, please post them. But this is the point where you have any questions. So I'm going to take the liberty of kind of answering my own question. So if someone would ask me this question, you know, how do you know that this is not just banter, you know, where it's not bullying harassment, it's just people kind of getting, you know, a bit obsessed or hurt for no reason? I mean, my point here is, it is about the impact of the behavior on the individual, not one's intent. And it's easy to be dismissive. I think it's easy to be dismissive if you've never experienced bullying harassment yourself. Whereas if you have, you may be more inclined to at least listen, rather than just say, oh no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think there is a real area of listening to understand. So it's, I think there is, and I'm hoping, as I say, that the research is going to kind of bring out some of these nuances that do exist in the workplace. So, did anybody ask any questions?
No, it looks like we've not got any additional questions that have come through. We will, as I said, we'll circulate these slides after the session. We will reiterate that question that's already been posed throughout the presentation, so you can refresh on that and give us your thoughts. You know, if a burning question springs to mind as soon as we've completed, then please feel free to slot that in as well, and I'm sure that we can come up with a response to come back to you on.
So let me just jump in with one point then. I think the Manchester research is scheduled to report in July, so you can expect to see something coming out from them then.
Super, and we've got a live practitioner event at the end of April as well, so keep your eye peeled for that if you'd like to join us. You're very welcome.
It'll be great to see you face to face rather than over web, so hopefully you can come.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.